You guys know the drill. You've seen the title for this video, so you know what's about to go down. And I'm excited to share with you a lot of progress. I have a lot of clips of things that go along the way with what is going on. But I want to give you a little bit of backstory, and we'll get into more detail of that a little bit later. So back earlier this year, I took the Saab out to an event because that's what the airplane was built for, to share with other people. It was a big hit. Lots of people are loving the Saab. And what's great is I got more flight time. But what's not great is I had an instance where I found a failure point, and the failure point was a stall speed, and the airplane rolled to the right with a crosswind, which induced a really hard side load on the landing gear, which caused both main landing gear to collapse. So with that, we incurred some damage. And so I want to cover today what I've repaired on the Saab and what's to come on it. So let's move right into the airplane. We are going to cover pretty much the entire fuselage. I've done things from stem to stern, and we'll just start at the front because that's honestly where I started. Now, in the crash, I say crash, the mishap, we'll say, there were a number of things that happened on the front. First and foremost, the cowl, the 3D printed cowl did crack, so I had to repair that. So repairing the cowl involved first gluing it back together with CA, but then there were some additional rash spots as part of that because things didn't exactly want to line up well. So with that came some Bondo, and not necessarily Bondo itself, but just the spot putty. You use the spot putty to fill some of the imperfections and holes, and then you sand it back. It looks really, really ugly, but then you paint it back and you get this. In addition to that, when I had the cowl off, the dummy radial, two of the three mounts had broken free, so I had to redo that as well. I've done some additional smoothing on the spinner. It's not perfect just yet, but it's really, really close. So yeah, more progress there. The exhaust pipes didn't take much of a hit at all, so there really was nothing there to really repair. As well as the canopy and cockpit, my pilot is still looking really, really good. Really pleased with how the pilot turned out, as well as the canopy. Nothing really majorly wrong there. What I did also have an issue with was the tail. So the tail had a number of complications. I had originally used pin hinges, and with the pin hinges there was some, not slop, but there was play. There was play in the rudder where you could move it side to side just because of the plastic bending from the pin hinges. So I was able to replicate what was recommended on the plans, which is like a flat hinge. Just 3D printed, and I used eyelets from servo mounts. I've got a whole stash of them, and was able to crimp those and make a new hinge point for these two spots, and it just does not have that play anymore at all, which is fantastic. There's less play in or slop in the rudder overall. Now, I did have to go inside the fuselage and make a few repairs, so let me flip the airplane over and I'll get to show you what I had to do there. So looking in here on the bottom, you can see there's an extra square. Yeah, so I had to dig into the fuselage. The steering gear, the tail gear, had broken somehow. I wasn't sure, but it was all over the place, all sloppy loosey. Cut open this hole because I knew where it was. I could shine a light on the backside and see the silhouette of where the formers were. And I got inside, and I was surprised that somehow the tubing had gotten bent and had broken. The steering gear had gotten twisted around backwards. It happens. But what my solution was to create a longer threaded rod. Just cut a longer threaded rod and screw that into the same, honestly, the same push rod. Just was able to compensate inside of the fuselage up by the servo mount. The threaded rod here is now inside of the sleeve, so it's going to be you're going to break something really catastrophically if that happens again. So that I'm very much more confident about that. Replace the same piece of foam with Gorilla Glue, smoothed everything out, put a patch of fiberglass, and still need to do the smoothing on the fuselage. Added some additional glass on the tail skeg here, which was not added before, as well as cleaned up some additional rash along the fuselage. Now this has seen some wet and some grass and other things, so that was necessary. I knew that this is a prototype. I wanted to fly it and make sure that everything was working before I do the final paint. So the last thing we need to cover on the fuselage is this. Now, I had intended to do a bomb bay from the start. I just did not have enough time for Ceph. Just not enough time. And I'm still not officially done on this, but what you have is a hole that was cut. I had originally marked with a single pen dot where my cut marks were going to be. You can see that I already built in the wood. That was, if you go way back, you'll see that I had originally built this for the bomb bay. I did have to line the sides with some additional pieces of foam, and then I fiberglassed those. Added the hinges, of course, the Dubro flat hinges. And how did we get the doors? So the doors are laid up before I made any cuts. That's really where I started. I started by laying, well, I took off the exhaust ports first of all. That was easy enough. But you lay saran wrap, just kitchen saran wrap over the whole belly. And I used masking tape to hold it there and stretch it so that there were no wrinkles in it. From there, I did 3 layers of the heavy 6-ounce glass, 3 layers of that, and then a final finish coat of glass, and then put some saran wrap over top of that to help keep it smooth and minimize the amount of sanding that I had to do. In hindsight, I really didn't need to do that, but it's okay. It's just sort of how I do my process. Anyway, from there, leave it overnight. It cured out, took the plastic off, let it cure out another day. And then from there started working holes with more of the spot putty. There's lots of sanding involved there, but thankfully, since it's such a small part, the sanding was not terrible. Shot some primer on it just to get some base white on it. The color that's going on the bottom will cover this just nice. And just cut a little bit of a notch for the hinges right here. Moving on to the inside, I went through a couple of iterations of how the doors open and close. Ultimately, I chose the simpler option. A little bit more expensive by having 2 servos, but one servo has a reverser on the inside. Then they're wide to one single channel. And these just open on a simple switch. I'm using my standard 3D printed bomb release mechanism that's been around for a while now. I've used that on multiple models for multiple bomb drop mechanisms. It's a single servo. I can load the bomb without having to have the airplane powered on. I can open and close the doors manually if I want to. I do want to get a little spring back here or a piece of elastic cord to keep these closed. I want to put a piece of balsa trim along the leading and trailing edges of the bay to help seal that and give a hard stop point for when the doors close. That way it'll look more finished. Then the bomb is also my design, the 3D printed one. It's pretty straightforward to print. It's in 3 parts. I've got 1/2 ounce of lead weight up here in the nose, and then just sand it so that it's nice and smooth, doesn't look like a print. It drops great, and I'm super happy with this. A little bit more refining yet to do, but the basic gist of it is there. All right, so here's a fun bit. All right, so you've got custom sounds.
Bomb bay doors closed. Bomb bay doors open. Bomb armed.
Okay, so I've got the bomb arm position. Now, whenever I hit the switch, the momentary switch up here for the bomb release, it'll say
bombs away.
Bombs away, okay? But
bomb bay doors closed.
If the bomb is not armed, when the doors are closed, it won't do it. Now, the cool thing about the bomb drop is that it's a fun gimmick, right? It's an attention getter. You know, you have bomb drops all the time, but internal bay bomb drop, in my opinion, is kind of cool because you get to see the doors open and close. So that's the one kind of gimmick thing on this model, but it's really easy to do. There's plenty of space for it in Jerry Bates' plans, and I couldn't not, because it's like, you can see it's pretty easy and straightforward to do. So from there, that's really all that I've done on the fuselage itself. Cleaning up some minor rash and repair along the bottom as I added some glass work around the trim of the bay. All minor stuff, just cosmetic things in preparation for paint, things that I knew I was probably going to have to do anyway just from flying the model. So let's move on to the wings and I'll show you that repair. Both wing repair procedures were done essentially the same, so I'll just cover one wing, but it was really the same for both. So what's worth mentioning is that the flaps, you know, I was on landing, so they were about at half. They were about at half flap, and so when the landing gear gave, the flaps took some of the brunt of the fall, and so some of the hinges had broken free. So it's really nice that I made these serviceable with this pin, this long wire, so that I could remove the hinge and get in there and just make sure that everything was glued properly again. Really nice thing to do. Highly recommend it if you have a model like this and you making things serviceable. Keep that in mind. Do the best you can. Accidents happen. Moving on with the landing gear mounts themselves. Really what I needed to do was just forget the weight. I need the forward nose weight anyway. And the mounts for these retracts are basically just slightly forward of the center of gravity. The airplane flies just fine, so I'm not worried about the weight. I used 6 mil plywood and made a mounting box for the landing gear, and epoxied in with 30-minute epoxy so that it's tied into the wood ribs as well as on the spar. It's tied in perfectly fine at this point, and it's solid. It is solid. From there, I used the geometry that I already had to make sure that the holes were drilled just fine for the spats, the gear cowls, the gear covers, the retract covers, whatever you want to call these things. The geometry is kind of tricky. You've got, if you remember, there's a bracket that's pinned here. That's a pivot point, and then there's another pivot point on the mount that's like right here. And this time, before I was kind of in a rush. I did do some additional trimming on the retracts. Let me power these things up, and I'll show you what that looks like. So now with the landing gear up, you can see where I had to use a carbide bit and just lightly trim the corners of that retract, just so that it'll fit inside of here. You can see the specific hole. This hole had to be in a very specific location to get this to pivot right around the leading edge of the wing and away from this last little piece of trim here. But these boxes are super, super solid, and you can see this side where I had to trim a little bit more, and it's right up against that screw hole, but this will hold just fine. This is a really nice thick piece of aluminum. It's nice to have good mounted retracts. So from there, Had a couple of small boo-boos, just some minor rash, minor stuff that had to be repaired, just cosmetic stuff. So after that, I went to an event. I went to Fredericksburg, Virginia. They have a really nice club there, really nice facility, and they had a Warbirds and Classics event. And it was a good time. And I took the Saab, and everybody loved the Saab. It's interesting. I even stumped one guy on knowing what it was, because it's got a look, a tail of like a Corsair, and then a cowl sort of like a Corsair. There's a lot of cues from other airplanes in this model, but it doesn't look quite right. And of course, it's not painted. So that was the biggest gripe. Everybody wants to see it painted. So at this point, all I have to do is do the micro balloons and sanding sealer and just go to town, smooth everything out, sand it all back, and make sure it's ready for paint. I'll probably do a little bit of primer. Probably don't need to. I'm going to be using interior latex paint. I've been converted to Lowe's rather than Home Depot. In the past, I've used Home Depot almost exclusively because they do really good color matching. But Lowe's also does good color matching too. And I've got this Valspar. This is my olive that will be on the top of everything. And then on the bottom, we've got this really, really pretty shade of blue. It's going to look amazing. And these are taken specifically from photographs off the internet. The best reference that I could find, because there's just not good color references for things of this era. Remember, the paints of this era, they didn't have a whole lot of binders in them. They were done using a lot of pigments. And so you had a base paint and you added pigment to it. So I learned this from going to the Udvar-Hazy Restoration Museum for the Smithsonian, and had a great conversation with the paint guys, and that's what they did. And so looking at, airplanes in combat, they're going to look different from one sortie to the next, just because of dirt, grime, battle damage, sea spray, all these things, because these paints just didn't hold well. They weren't very UV stable. They chipped off pretty easily, and the colors were mixed in the field. They just threw in a bunch. There was a regulation amount, but the guys were, after time, they were just like, that looks about right. And so you get a lot of color variation, even in the rare instances that you do have color photographs. So we're as close as I can get realistically. I'm trying to capture that experience for myself of mixing paint and getting it about right. So there you go. That's the update on the Saab. I will be doing this throughout the coming months, weeks, whatever, as I get started on the big Dubro giveaway projects. So stay tuned for that. The giveaway stuff will be on Mondays, and the first and third Mondays of each month, there will be a live stream with Dubro, Facebook, YouTube. Look them up there. And if you follow along, you'll be entered into the giveaway. If you make purchases, you'll be entered into the giveaway. Keep flying your works of art. Keep building your flying works of art. I'm going to keep doing the same, and I will see you guys on the next one.